Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Hart Bound Editing Podcast. I am Rebecca Hartwell, and I am the developmental editor behind Hart Bound Editing. It is my goal to help authors turn their stories into bestsellers or masterworks that can change their world. Today's guest is S.F Henne, the author of The Last Lunar Witch. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your journey as an author?
It's been a long one, even though I am just now a debut. Um, so it started, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. It started way back in like 2005, I think it was. And my sister and I were complaining about a TV show that did a romance really badly. And we're just like, that was so terrible. We could do something better than that. And then I think my sister saw this ad for what is it, Harlequin, that was like, submit your books. And we're like, let's do that. We can write books. And of course, I ended up creating a space opera in my head, which has gone nowhere. But it kind of started this that I'm like, hey, I could write these stories. I've always loved that. And over the years, I kept on making new stories, never getting anywhere until last year, where I finally got it, finally got a first draft done, and then now have published it.
Very exciting. So tell us a little bit more about your debut novel, The Last Lunar Witch.
So it is not yet out in print, but I do have my very first copy of it,
How
which
exciting.
fantastic to have. It just sits here on my desk so I can look at it knowing that like I did this. So the Last Lunar Witch was started out from a competition where you were given a pen name and a cover with a title, which was originally called Witch of the Lunar Order, and you had to create a story from that. And originally, it was just meant to be a little cozy book about a witch who worked at a sentient coffee shop and made cookies. And then as I was writing it, it took a very sharp turn, as as you will remember very well, Rebecca.
Chapter 10
Um,
was a doozy. I remember that.
and it was obviously showing my inexperience. But this whole new story just came to me as I was writing it, and turned into things with dark witches and warlocks and demons. And now with the second version of it, which is renamed The Last Lunar Witch, it is about Nissa, who is a witch with broken magic, and she is trying to fix her magic. Ends up taking a potion which alters her magic in a way that she didn't expect. And she unleashes a rare and dangerous magic that is capable of tearing the veil between realms. And this veil separates her realm from the one that is controlled by demons. So this story follows her as she tries to fix her mistakes. She tries to control her magic, and I'm trying not to give away too much, but it is book one. It will be a 7 book series that follows Nissa, and eventually she will join the Lunar Order, which is why I had to change the name because she doesn't join it in book one.
Very cool. I love that. I don't think I'd heard how many books you had planned out in that. Now I'm all excited. I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to read them. Awesome. So you said that you sort of got your start watching a really bad romance. What drew you to writing specifically like the fantasy heavy romance that you're writing right now?
So it was like I enjoy subplot romance. That was always something even back then, because it was Battlestar Galactica was the TV show, and it was just the romance between what is it, Apollo and Starbuck that my sister and I are like, this doesn't make any sense. So I've always enjoyed romance, but definitely as an addition to either science fiction or fantasy. And I mean, I there was so many uh fantasies and science fictions that I've been influenced by. Obviously, Star Wars is a big one, which is why I definitely like the science fantasy part. But I just thought that magic is so much more interesting than the real world. I just like these epic stories. And even though this was an urban fantasy, which again was meant to be cozy, towards the end, it definitely does get epic in nature because I guess that's just how I roll.
So you've touched a little bit on, learning as you go as a
Mhm.
first time author, at least on this scale. And it sounds like the genres just kind of came naturally to you based on your interests. When you were either planning out the story or starting to write it or in the editing phases, did you have any consideration towards the tropes that you either wanted to use or that you noticed came out in your work, and what did you either do with those, or how do you feel about what actually ended up being there?
I've never been one for tropes unless it is a romance. But with my fantasies, I definitely I'm always drawn to strong female characters. And in my epic fantasy, which is yet to be published, like my characters, like she's wields swords and crossbows and has magic and it's all of this. And in this book, I really wanted to create a character who has that inner strength while she might not be your typical character who wields a sword. So in this, she's very much a support. She's got potions, she's got shields and things like that. Um, so it was really in this one, it was just me wanting Nissa to accept who she is. And a lot of my themes will be about acceptance. So in this one, it starts off with found family and being accepted by others, accepting yourself. And I really wanted, it sounds very odd. I just wanted positivity. I wanted healthy relationships, male female relationships, female female relationships. And that's kind of where the cozy started. And I've tried to keep it, even though things get a little more heavy. But I want books where the parents don't die. I want books where there aren't backstabbing female friends. I want books where a male and female can be friends and it's completely platonic, which I had a few issues making sure that that was cemented in this one. But it's just like I want people to feel hopeful and have the positive outcome. I'm like the complete opposite of dark fantasy. So
And yet, I loved the darker elements in your story. So let's talk about your process a little bit. Starting at the beginning, are you a plotter and an outliner, or more of a pantser, make it up as you go along kind of writer?
I because of the restrictions of the competition, when I did the first draft, I was definitely pantsing it. I had a very general idea, and I really didn't like that. So it was very good to learn that. I call myself a gardener or a planter, as some people say. I like to have a good structural outline. I'm very much do like the plot points, like the inciting incident, the midpoint, the black moment, because I feel like they're just uh, they're linchpins that I need to understand to build up to it. So when I was redoing book one and when now with my planning for book two, I make sure that these moments are there and then I can fill in between. But I very much pants my scenes. I'm like, okay, it might be like they need to get from here to here, and I just pants and see what happens. Or I have a more general idea, but there's definitely times where they kind of just go off on their own tangent. Or I might just be like, hey, this is a fun idea, let's see where it goes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So it's kind of picking the best of both worlds, but I know that I can't straight up pants because I waffle a lot. And I found this when I was doing my epic fantasy a couple years ago, where I was like, oh, my character just needs to get from point A to point B on her horse by herself. Like 10,000 words later, she'd finally arrived. And I'm like, that probably wasn't necessary, but I had this in my head. I thought I needed to show this to the reader. And from obviously learning more and getting feedback, I learned, no, they don't. Nothing important happens. They don't need to know
That's all fascinating to hear. So, having done both like straight pantsing and the gardening, which I love that term,
that.
how do you feel that each approach like came through in the final product? Like, what effect do you think that your approach to it has on the resulting scenes or books or whatever?
With the pantsing, it was very much that while I could get out, I think I got out like 80,000 words in a month and a half. So I could get the words out, but I needed very heavy, extensive editing. So there was a lot that I needed to change, a lot that I needed to fix. And what happened with my very first version, which was 2 months for, I think it was about 80,000 as well, is that I scrapped the whole thing. It was a good learning experience, I will say that, but I pretty much scrapped the entire book. I had a general idea and then I wrote it all again. And because I knew more about my characters, I knew the journey I wanted to go on, it was a lot easier to write. It still obviously had some issues, but when I did it again with my solid plan, I required a lot less editing. The developmental part, there were still issues, but they weren't like world breaking issues. They weren't these huge issues that would stop a reader in their tracks. So I think it was good to learn both, but for me at least, if I have a plan, I have a lot cleaner draft.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're a pretty fast drafter if you're finishing a book in a month and a half or 2 months. Are you a consistency drafter? Are you like that person who's like, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day? Or are you like me and more of a sprint drafter where you're going to draft, a quarter of the book over a weekend sort of thing?
It was it was very stressful doing that, and it was only because I was in that competition and I found that I did need hard deadlines to be able to get there. Because like I've been trying to write a book for 10 years, never got anywhere, but it was those hard deadlines and learning that I could do it. So I was very much I'm going to sit down every day, and again my goal was about 1,000 words. Some days were less, some days were more, and towards the end, when the panic kicked in, I had one day where I got about 8,000 words in one day, which I never want to do again because that is very tiring. But I did learn from being very intensive like that I burnt myself out.
Mm.
And I think it took me about 3 months to recover to actually start getting sparks again. Like I didn't think anything. And there was one day I was finally, I can't remember, I think I was like washing the dishes and I had this small little spark of something that I wanted to change in the story. I was like, oh, okay, I'm finally getting it back. So I don't want to do that again. But I do right now for book two. I started doing sprints in a Discord group, and I mean, I'll do them by myself. But I found that doing it in there where other people can see me, having that accountability. I even recorded it and started posting it on TikTok again as that accountability, just to make sure that I kept on doing it. And I got to about 20 days of consistency, and I think I got to 45,000 words, and then I hit my wall, and I'm like, I need to go back and start planning. So I went back, I went to the plan again, figured out what's going on, trying to fill in more details. So it's very different, and again, it's only book two for me, so it's lots of learning. But hopefully this time I will be able to do it without burning myself out because it is not fun.
No, it's not. And it's always nice to hear when folks are like actually making a plan to avoid that because I still haven't figured that out in my own writing, so I'll let you know. So, the part that I'm most interested in, both as a writer and obviously as an editor, is the revision process that folks go
Mhm.
through, especially indie authors like you. So, tell me a little bit more about not only your professional editing, which I had the privilege of helping with, but what was your self-editing process like?
It was very messy, I will say, because I really wasn't sure what to do. So it's like I had this first draft, and then I was like, what do I do now? And I definitely had some beta readers, which is where it helped kind of figuring out what it was. If I'd had more time without the constraints of the competition, I definitely would have put it aside, which is what I did when we're doing the second version of the book was I let it sit for I think I could only managed about a week before I'm like I need to get back to this. But it was letting my mind relax, step away, and then I could start to think of things and I'm like, "Oh, that doesn't quite work," or this and that. But I did find that there was definitely issues which I cannot see in my own work. And it's like it's all up in my head. And so both times with that and with other books that I've worked on, is that you cannot see the biggest mistakes or issues, should I say, not really mistakes, issues that you are making because you are just too close to it. I don't know how anyone could go through and not get some outside eyes on it just because you need that realization. And every time, like all of the things that you mentioned to me and some of my beta readers, I was like, 100%, I understand that. I don't know why I couldn't see that, but you are 100% right about it. So it's definitely, I definitely think that you need for the large structural issues, you definitely need somebody with good knowledge to look at it and point the things out. And then for me, I work um, with I have a process. It's like red light issues, yellow light, and then green light. And so it's like depending on how big they are. So red light issues are like there's an issue with the major plot, like big structural issues, the point of view, um, cause and effect is another one. And so I'll try and work through them, the ones that are going to take me the most amount of time. And then green light is like grammar issues and things like that. So I do try and tackle the big ones first and then move my way down. But yeah, learning how to structure them is definitely a big thing. I'm very glad that I understood that because I was definitely like most people are. And it's like, I need to go back to chapter 1 and I need to tweak this sentence and I need to do this. And it's like, it doesn't matter because that whole chapter might go. You might change the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm definitely a huge proponent of okay, fix the issues biggest to smallest always. And the red light, yellow light, green light, and the cause and effect. I think Jenny
Mm.
Nash
Yes, that's where it's
is
from.
yeah, she's great. Those are two tips that I, keep in my little toolkit because they can be really, really helpful. So you mentioned beta readers, and
Mhm.
obviously you and I met through the critique partner or beta reader group that I run, the Fantasy Virtual Critique Partners. What was your experience getting beta reader feedback versus the professional developmental edit that you did with me? Like what were some of the pros and cons or biggest differences that you noticed there?
Yes. So beta reading, I definitely enjoy having beta readers, but I definitely think they should be coming after a developmental edit. Just because from from what I know from doing developmental edits, there's some people just understand stories better than others. And it's the reason why I got into developmental editing because I was doing beta feedback for other people and picking up these issues that they're like, oh, nobody else got that. This is really good. I think that there are just some people who can see, I guess, are like above the surface. They see the whole story. They can see what's working, whereas other people are just taking the place of a regular reader who are like, nah, this doesn't seem right. But it's definitely the smaller issues. And also beta readers can be very hit and miss. Sometimes it's like, okay, like, what do you think of my characters? What do you think of the overall story? And then they will do like line editing, like you missed this period and you missed this comma and things like that. And I'm like, that I don't care about it.
It can be
So
hard to like voice that when they're giving you their time for free.
yes,
So,
yes. I'm like, I appreciate that. It's not exactly what I'm looking for. So it's definitely if people don't have the money for like a developmental edit, I definitely suggest trying to find people that they trust that they know can look at the deeper issues. Because like if I'd published my book without the beta with the beta feedback that I hadn't got from you, that was just the other ones, I probably would have kept the story very much similar and that would have been bad because it was a fundamentally flawed story, and I can 100% say that. Um, so I definitely think that people need to get a professional editor just because they have that deep knowledge of how stories work. And even if you are an editor and you know it, you can't do your own book
yes, you can't
because
see the
we
forest through the trees, not
you can't.
ever.
It's like yes, you might have a cleaner story, but you definitely won't be able to see the big issues. So I'm even though I am an editor, so I can say that, but I'm like 100% get a developmental edit, especially if it's your first book, because it's so important and you will learn so much. Like there was so many things from your comments on my book that I understood like where you were coming from. And so I think I was trying to learn how I can try and see that in my own, try and fix it before it gets to these really big mistakes. Um, Beta readers, I do think, are very helpful to have just to catch those smaller issues. So it's like while you have like the good structural plot, they might pick up something that was probably what I consider like a yellow light issue. It's not something that's going to be critical to the story, but if you fix it, it will just make it that much better. And so I had a couple of beta readers who had some great feedback and something that I'd never even thought of. And I was like, that's fantastic. I am using that because it is such a good idea. And it was me just not even realizing. So they both have their place though.
Absolutely. And I agree that beta readers are probably the most useful after the developmental edit because like you brought up earlier with that hierarchy, you want to fix the biggest issues first, which is going to be the developmental edit. And then I think that using beta readers to check the changes that you make after the developmental edit and make sure you don't introduce new problems is also a very useful tool that they can help provide. I know I've experienced that in my own work.
It's not fun.
So your story was probably the story that changed the most between the two different versions that I read. The first one was through the Critique Partners group, and the second one was the professional developmental edit. And you mentioned earlier that you set it aside and you rewrote it from scratch. So there were huge differences, and I was just curious, like, do you feel like you lost anything from that first draft, or do you feel like it was just an improvement across the board?
I there was one particular scene which you have mentioned that was missing that I really did enjoy, but it just I did not have a place for it with with how my character changed with how I changed the story.
Mhm.
Um, so while I was I don't really think that there was anything that I really lost that I couldn't bring back later. Um, because it definitely felt like I was just exploring the world, exploring the characters, and wanted the changes I made were very big, but it put the story in a whole different direction, which was more in line with what I was wanting to achieve, because I was kind of going a bit too dark, which I didn't mean to do, and I didn't want that. And so I thought, let's rein it back. And I think a lot of the things that I removed was like removing extra characters that weren't needed. Um, and putting in place more scenes where I could develop my character, where I could focus very much on Nissa rather than let's add in more characters, let's add in more plot lines that are not needed here that I can maybe move later. And it's sometimes I find it very hard because I forget like which story was which. But there's definitely characters that I cut that were not needed. Um, and that's something that I now notice when I'm reading other books. And it's like, you should have cut down these characters, or these characters could have been combined. I'm totally lost. I don't know who anyone is anymore. So it definitely helped me to be like, I need to make all of my side characters unique. They need to have a purpose and add to the story. So that was probably the biggest thing is I was taking away to focus to shine more of a light on the people who I wanted it to be.
Well, I think it made a massive improvement in the story, and I feel like that issue in particular of just having too large of a cast for the story being told is so common, specifically in fantasy.
Yes.
So it's definitely something that I feel like I've mentioned to authors that I've worked with with higher regularity than I meant lots of other points that I could bring up. Just it's frequently, all right, you have 5 characters you don't need. You can just combine their role into, 1 or 2. So yeah, that's fascinating to hear, and it's so cool that you started over from scratch and had that much improvement from it. So, what are the biggest changes? And I know we just talked about some of this with like the characters and all of that, but what were the biggest changes that you had to make, let's say, to that second draft, having finished it and getting feedback on that second draft? What were the biggest changes that either you noticed or a feedback reader noticed?
It was probably two main things that I really noticed, which was one was the pacing. Um, because because it's an urban fantasy, I did want to keep it very, very tight. So it was definitely trying to make sure that everything flowed, that there weren't any like fluff scenes, that there was still a chance for characters to interact with each other and forge relationships, but definitely um, making sure that every scene added to the major plot line. And even though there was some that I really liked, I knew that I could take them out, that I could add them as like a bonus scene, or here's a deleted scene. Um, the other biggest change was ensuring that Nissa came off how I saw her. So in my very first draft, I know that she definitely came off to other people more so than others as a bit, well, I wouldn't say whiny, but like it's probably the closest it is. But that she was very. very harsh on herself, that she was constantly berating herself and a very negative self-talk, which I kind of didn't notice. And so it was trying to make sure that she still had that, but it wasn't a detriment to the reader, that the reader's just like, okay, get over it. Yeah, you tore the veil between the realms. We get it. So it was making sure that she was still coming off as likable and a character you could root for without annoying the reader with her. I guess I would negativity, I guess would be the best thing. But I wanted to make her build her up to what she is in the end without her being annoying.
And that is such a great point to bring up in the context of needing that outside feedback is I
Hmm.
feel like a lot of people struggle to have particularly their protagonist come across to an audience who isn't in their head the way that they wanted it to. That's
Yes.
something that I've seen before. So from these big edits that you made, which one did you have the most resistance to that was the hardest for you to implement because you were emotionally attached to it or you didn't know how to approach the problem or anything like that?
Uh, I'm trying to think if there was. I was surprisingly very ruthless with it, and I could just be like, "No, this is going." I remember with the very original version. I can't remember specifically what you commented, but I remember reading your feedback and just being like, "Oh, that's not what I want at all." And I think it was because I'm like, I don't know how to fix it. And I'm like, I think it's just a fundamental flaw. So I'm like, let's just get rid of it because this is not what I want. And it was me wanting to have the best product I could and not me being like, I don't want to rewrite it. I'm just like, no, this clearly is something that needs to be done. Um and so I just was able to cut it. I know there was definitely some things, I don't believe it was your comments, but it was a couple from a beta reader, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know about this," and I'm like, "No, I'm standing firm. Like, I like this scene, I like these characters, or something like that." And I'm like, I'm not going to change this because I enjoy it, and it was one person's opinion. When it's a developmental editor, I definitely pay more attention to it because I'm like, I know that you are coming from a place of understanding, of seeing the issues. Like I know you had a scene where you're like, this doesn't add to it. And I'm like, okay, I like this scene, but you're right. So I'm like, it's still there. And it actually, the funny thing was, it worked out really well because originally I had a scene where Nissa went to a bar, and it was just about her becoming more comfortable with herself, spending time with her friends, but it really didn't add enough to the story to warrant a whole chapter. And so what ended up happening is I had the end of the scene was like, Lisa thinking about, she's like, she knew that she wouldn't regret going out and spending time with these people. I have a scene break, and then the next line is, she regretted everything. And people absolutely loved that. They thought it was hilarious. And so it was funny that removing this scene and not showing it actually made it a positive experience for the reader. Like they absolutely loved that. And so I'm now reassured that it's like I can take things away and it definitely might improve it, even if I do love that scene.
Oh, I love to hear that. And honestly, your answer does not surprise me because you are one of the most ruthless and least precious and gung-ho authors I've ever worked with, which is delightful because I am so familiar with that emotional resistance that it's so easy to get, especially on your first book,
Yeah.
of just, but it's what I want it to be. What do you mean it could be better if I changed it? So absolutely. Props to you for being that ruthless. And I
I
think that learning to take feedback that way is such a valuable skill, especially for authors. So you are doing quite well by being that out ahead of it.
I was just going to add to that. I was just going to say, I think that for me, I might be less resistant just because this isn't a passion project. Whereas
Mm.
I think a lot of debut authors, like my book, which I've been working on for so many years, it's like that is my heart. Whereas this, I came to it very much as like, I'm just going to write this book. And it didn't have all of that extra baggage attached. So I could just let it go. But it's not easy. I can understand why people resist.
Yeah, and I also want to go back to something that you touched on because I was going to ask, like, did you get any feedback that you just decided not to take? And you already answered that. But I do want to talk about that a little bit because it's one of the challenges that I face as a developmental editor is we can do tons of research, we can read all of the books, but at the end of the day, it's still a very subjective expertise that even really good editors can bring to the table. And one of the challenges that I faced that is glad to hear is coming across well is finding ways to phrase those suggestions and that feedback in a way that is objective as possible. And one of the things that I'll do is, for example, that scene in the bar that I suggested that you cut because it wasn't serving the scene. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I would not have said something like, "This scene isn't serving the story, you should cut it." It's usually, "Hey, what was the point of this scene? Is there a core action? Like, can you name why this scene is here? If not, you may consider scrapping." Like, I try to be very diplomatic about it, but
Yes.
it's also very nice to hear that even if I wasn't, my expertise counts for something.
It is hard to get across, and I understand that, like, definitely when I've like done beta reading for people, it's like you try to like justify it, because I mean, I know for me when I've had like beta readers comment just like, I don't like this, or like it would just be like a comment, I definitely can take it very negatively, and that will definitely make me more resistant if someone says something like that. Whereas if it's a comment that uh like makes me ask questions. Like I know for my first draft version, you'd mentioned, we were talking about something. It's like, which way are you trying to go? Because this is what I see, and it's like, this is kind of leading this way, this is leading this way, and you can't do both of these. So it was very objective. It's like, this is what I am seeing, and here's the facts about it that you have put in your book. And it's like, which one are you trying to do? So it's not just like a, you're doing this wrong, but it's to understand where the issues are coming from. Whereas other people will, who I've definitely understood, will give you that backup. They're like, is this what's going on? I'm not sure. Like, this is what's happening. So those ones I'll definitely be able to take a step back and see where they're coming from. Whereas it's just like, I don't like this. It's like, well, that doesn't help me. I don't know why you don't like it.
I've seen some quote and I'll have to look up and see who it was from, but it was something along the lines of a reader is almost always correct when something is wrong and almost never correct about why. And that stuck with me. And it seems to be true. Like readers, and this is something that I'll address in my edit letters. I'm just like, hey, a reader is probably going to interpret this way because that's the emotional gut reaction.
Mhm.
But a reader isn't going to be able to articulate that necessarily. They're not going to
Yes.
know why the end of the book just fell flat and was
Hmm.
disappointing. It's my job as a developmental editor to have the vocabulary and the experience and the research to tell you why it's falling flat at the end and how to do something about that.
Yes.
So I want to jump in and just talk a little bit about my impressions of the story having edited it. I went back and reread my feedback letter to you to sort of brush up my brain on not only the version that you released, but the version that I actually edited and gave feedback on. Um, and Nissa, I- like you said, she had some agency and some just character likability issues in the first draft, but she was so much better in the second and even better in the published version. And I really liked how you brought her underdog story to the forefront without making it, like you'd said, sort of a, "Oh, pity me" kind of character arc. She was an actual underdog, like you even say in your blurb. She has broken magic, and this is an element that has influenced her life. And I loved the ways that you were able to build that in very relatable ways by the end and show her not just getting fixed, because that's what I see in a lot of sort of, broken magic or broken personality stories, but showing her finding ways that she can still be valuable and still show up in her world and do what she wants to in ways that are already inherent to her that don't need to get fixed, that never needed to get fixed. So, in that respect, I absolutely love it as an underdog story. And I also loved your secondary characters. They were so much fun. They were so unique. They had a lot going on. Not one of them was two-dimensional. It was very, very fun. I did want to ask you, I loved your sort of animal companion that plays the mentor role, and I was wondering what your inspiration there was. I don't think I ever asked.
So that was something I have to thank one of my fellow author friends, Journey Windrow. So she did a beta read for me. I can't remember when it was. I think it was before I published the very first version of it, but she was talking about how my character needed someone to talk to. And because that was the thing, Nissa was very isolated. And so I'm like, how do I give her someone to talk to? And then this fox companion just came in. I didn't want to do a cat because everyone does cats. So I'm like, let's make it something interesting. And so I just had this fox, and I'm like, that would be a great way. And then the addition of the book as well that I added in. I'm like, I needed to find ways to give her information. But what a book can't do is obviously give you emotional support. And so I wanted to have someone who was there to support Nissa, who was there to be a mentor, to help her, and give her really what she has been missing, which is someone who is there for who she wants to be. And it was an absolute blast to write the companion. I had so much fun with it. And it definitely gave me this whole new dynamic, which was what I was missing in the earlier versions of it. It was my character was very much alone and isolated, and it's just like, how is she going to overcome these things if she doesn't have that support? So yes, always add animal companions when you can. They are fantastic, and readers love them.
And I'm a sucker for animal companions, especially when they're written well, but yours was so unique and also being such a strong mentor presence. Like the classic hero's journey or heroic journey. You're supposed to have a mentor character, but in your story in particular, it was so strong and it was so prevalent throughout the story. The story would have been very different without that guidance and support and everything that you were just talking about, and making it a fox. It was a blue fox, right?
Yes.
Yeah, making it a blue fox that can just kind of magically be there, but then not be there and like communicate with her in these really unique and interesting ways was so cool in adding to your world building, which is another aspect that I thought you did really well. Because, like you mentioned, it's urban fantasy, it has the modern setting, there's the coffee shop, and they've got cell phones and stuff like that. But you brought such a unique flavor to it with where you drew those lines for, modern technology and then fantasy and where they mesh and overlap and blur into each other. It was absolutely delightful. And I feel like the Fox Mentor was this wonderful little just pinpoint example of that. So yeah, I'm a sucker for animal companions.
I'm glad you loved her. So
Yes. And I also loved the mix of the cozy and the dark because I'm sure you remember in the first version that I read, it was straight cozy, and then in chapter 9 it like dove off a cliff as far as darkness goes.
yeah.
And so I think I mentioned to you in my feedback on that version, like, hey, you wrote the dark action adventure stuff really well. Like that's where your writing was shining. So I was delighted reading the second version and seeing that you didn't go 100% in either direction. You found this fantastic balance that created a really dynamic rise and fall of the emotions throughout the whole story. So that was something else that I really, really enjoyed. Um, the other point that I jotted down to bring up was the romance. I know that I commented on both versions like, hey, it's just not crystallizing. And but that being said, you had such fun meet cutes and setups, and honestly, the problem was that there were too many potential suitors that I was like, oh, she'd be so cute with him. Oh, she'd be so cute with him. Wait, there's a third. She'd be so cute with him. So that's part of why I'm excited to hear that you already have more books planned in the series because I need to know who she ends up with. And also, you were so good at taking the feedback on that, and I can't wait to see what you do with it long term.
I definitely didn't want to give mixed signals, and that is one of the issues in this one thing is having a male female relationship that doesn't have any romance in it is so hard to do. And even when I read books, I'm like, I ship them. Oh, I ship them. Oh, she's with him. Oh, I guess that's okay. I still like them with them. And it's like I didn't. I wanted to make things that I really didn't want to give the mixed signals that you were picking up, and I started to see them. So it's like, how do I do this without how do I do this with making it clear and not be too cliche? So
Yeah. Well, I approve of what you did with that. So I'd also love to hear your thoughts on Nissa's internal character arc. I've touched on that, you've touched on that a little bit, but it continues to be so interesting to me that she seems to have a much more visible character arc than a lot of stories that I read, and she's self-aware of it to
mm.
a higher degree than a lot of other stories that I read. So I was wondering, what sort of theme or message were you hoping to offer the reader through that arc that she goes through, and if you had any thoughts about making the choices that you did around that?
It was I'm always love good character growth, and I'm the same as you. I find there's some books it's lacking, and now that I see it more, I notice it more, and I'm like, there was no character growth, there was no development. Like, yeah, that was a great plot, but where is the character element? That's what makes me remember the story. So I always try to make sure that that is hand in hand with the plot. And for Nissa, it was very much about self-acceptance. Um, and it came out about the story. It wasn't something I'd originally planned when I was first doing it, but this was very much in a similar situation to what I was when I was her age, was I moved to a whole different country and I was all by myself and I'm like, what am I doing? And it made me look at myself and be like, who do I want to be as an adult? Which is very much what this story is about. Who do I want to be as a person? What do I think of myself? And Nis is someone who's very much always looked for that external approval. She's like, I want to fix my magic so that my parents will accept me, that I'll be a normal witch and all of this. And as the story progresses, she meets other people who have been through similar journeys, who've been rejected by their own people, but have found themselves. And so I wanted to make sure that it was Nissa having the support and the community around her to realize who she is, who she wants to be, and accepting herself and not letting others and their external idea of what she should be as a witch. So it's very much about self acceptance in book one, and the whole series is Nissa just becoming the woman that she wants to be in many different aspects, as you can imagine if there's seven. But book one is very much about accepting who she is and not trying to change herself for others.
Love it. So, how much of your magic system, which comes to mind with the magic system playing such a part in her self-acceptance, how much of the magic system do you have planned out ahead of time, and how much do you let it grow organically as you're telling the story?
I very much need to know the magic system up front. So
Okay.
it would definitely when I'm fiddling around with the first draft, I like obviously things are growing, but I very much need a good plan. And so for this book and for my epic series, I actually worked with a book coach who does world building. And so I would pretty much write out everything I had for this book and the other one. I think we're both about like 20, 30 pages of everything I know about it, magic system, the world, and all that. And then I worked with them to make it solid because there's nothing I hate more than a magic system that doesn't make sense. So it was very much, again, I need those external eyes to figure out what isn't working. But I knew that I wanted something interesting. I love magic systems. I love when they're unique in their own way. And I'm like, I don't want to do elemental magic. I want to make this different for each race, which is setting myself up to do much more work. So I had ideas with what Nissa would be able to do, and through the feedback actually from both you and from my beta readers, I realized like where there was mistakes, which is why I went back and was like, I need to hash this out. I need to make it clear to the reader so they understand this how things work. But yeah, very much I need to know so that I know what Nissa can do, what she can pull from, and what she can't do. Because I'm also not a fan of like, oh no, we're in this situation, magic will save the day. It needs to be a bit more of a they need to figure it out and maybe use magic as a tool rather than it's just magic saving the day.
Well, I certainly appreciate that approach, both as an editor, but also just as a reader. I am Deus Ex Machina, that sense of magic just coming in when it's convenient bugs me so bad. So thank you for taking that approach. I would love to ask you some questions specifically as a debut author who seems uniquely keyed in to story structure and the processes around each of these stages. So, if you had one piece of advice for indie authors who want to be an author but don't have any ideas yet, what would it be?
Oh, there's so many. My biggest one would probably be to find a writing community, because I think that that is one of the biggest things. One of the biggest myths around writing is that you're meant to do it alone. And even after I had like the first draft, like from the competition, I ended up meeting some other writers and having a group with them. And without them, like I probably wouldn't have got this done. It would not be the book that it is today. Writing communities can just help in so many ways, whether it's helping you figure out ideas, whether it's giving you encouragement and support and feedback. And there's just so much that we need to be with surround us with other indie authors because they're all fantastic and everyone wants to see everyone succeed. Um, so it's finding that, and then everybody has a million resources. So it's starting to tap into what they've already gone through. It's like, we don't want you to do what we did. We don't want you to take 10 years to get your book out.
Right.
So yeah, finding that community, finding that support, it's priceless.
Absolutely. So, what would your one piece of advice be for folks who maybe have an idea and are committed to doing it for the process between, outlining and self-editing, the actual creation process that does have to be done just from ourselves? What would your one piece of advice for them be?
I would probably be to find a way to hold yourself accountable. And this would be to give yourself deadlines. Again, this is where the community can help is give yourself a deadline and have people hold yourself accountable. Because that's the really, unless you're one of those very few people who are very determined and can get a first draft out, unless you have that accountability, it's very hard to get the first draft done. You're like, I'm going to go back to chapter one. I'm going to go tweak this. Which is why it's like for me, I needed that deadline to get over that very first hurdle of, hey, I have a full first draft. It's like, I can do this. I know I can do this. But getting there is so hard. And like NaNoWriMo, that didn't help me at all. I'd write 50,000 words, and that's like half a story for me. So yeah, it's just finding like how accountability works for you. Like I know everyone works a little bit differently, but it's like, what can you do to make sure? Do you need to give yourself like, if I don't get this done by X date, I'm not going to buy a book, or I'm not going to do this or that, or I have to clean the dishes for a month. Something that is going to work. And then you have to tell someone, because it doesn't work if it's just in your head, because you can lie. Like tell your spouse or tell someone so that they can hold you accountable to it.
Fabulous. So, the third part of this, what would your one piece of advice be for folks who have a finished draft and have done the self-editing that they can on and are now looking at working with a book coach or developmental editor or jumping ahead to line and copy editing? What's your advice for finding or working with professionals at that stage?
First bit would be definitely work with a professional. It would, yeah, definitely go out and look because there are so many people out there. So it's definitely not just jumping at the first person you see, but finding someone who you connect with, who you feel that has uh that spark that's going to be inspired to help your story become the best it can be. Because there definitely are people out there who would just do their job, but then there are people like somebody I know in this room who, who have that real drive to make your story the best it can be. So it's looking around and finding someone who's on the same level as you. Like for me, it's like I wanted to make sure that I was working with someone who really understands fantasy, because if you go to an editor who doesn't understand fantasy, it's not going to work very well. You need them to be the right editor for you, and not to be worried about looking around and getting sample edits and things like that, to make sure you're on the same level.
Well, very kind of you to say. Thank you. So, lastly, where can folks find you to read your books or connect with you or learn more about what's coming next in your author career?
So my I am in KU, so I'm only on Amazon, as of right now. I am pretty much on all social media as SF Henne. Um, if you go to my excuse me, if you go to my webpage, which is just sfhenne.com, that will have links to everything, because I know like TikTok's a bit weird with their different ways that you can search for people. But yeah, I do TikTok occasionally. Right now, I'm not doing it because it sucks up so much time, and I have other things that I need to do in my life, like write. Instagram is the other main one because I really enjoy being on there. And I also have a newsletter which you can find through those social medias too. I have no prequel right now, which is the next thing that I need to be doing. I need to have that book out so that I can give it away, but I just have not gotten there yet.
Totally fair. Well, I look forward to reading the prequel if and when that ever comes out, and I certainly look forward to reading the next books in the series. So, thank you so much for being on the show. It has been a delight to chat with you. You are doing so many things so very well, and I wish you absolutely all the best in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I love chatting about books, so thank you for having me just to talk.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Hart Bound Editing Podcast. I look forward to bringing you more content to help you make a good story great so it can change lives and change your world. Follow along to hear more or visit my website linked in the description to learn how I can help you and your story to flourish. See you next time.